Hi, this is Darren with Philosophize Now. Do you want to be happier? Silly question. Of course you do. I've never heard anyone say they've been too happy lately. Well, today we look at a book by one of the most famous spiritual leaders, the Dalai Lama, as he tries to help us lead happier lives. This is The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama and Howard C. Cutler. This is a short 5-minute summary of the main concepts of this book. To see a more in-depth summary and my review of this book, please check out my other video. I've placed a link over here and in the description below. So this book has 4 distinct sections. The first section is the purpose of life. In the first few pages of the book, the Dalai Lama states that the purpose of life is happiness. No matter what an individual seeks, the ultimate goal is a better and happier life, and that this happiness can be achieved through training the mind. The first step in training the mind is to identify the sources of happiness, and then cultivate these factors which create happiness, such as kindness, compassion, and friendship, and eliminate the factors which create unhappiness, such as anger, hatred, and envy. He also says that happiness can be affected by one's state of mind. And then, secondly, training the mind for happiness. So how do we go about training the mind for happiness? Well, firstly, we have to learn how our emotions and behaviors affect us, and see that negative emotions and behaviors harm us, and positive emotions and behaviors benefit us. And then we apply the causal principle. This is the relationship between events and emotions. And then we practice increasing the events which create happiness, such as events which cause you to be compassionate or kind. And then we decrease events which create unhappiness, such as those events which cause you to be angry, selfish, or envious. And because this process can take a bit of time, the Dalai Lama suggests reviewing each day, so that you can see your progress daily and over the long run. Okay, so let's move on to the next section of this book, Human Warmth and Compassion. In this section, the Dalai Lama talks about intimacy and compassion, as these factors have shown to improve overall well-being. So how do you create intimate relationships? Dalai Lama gives 3 aspects which you can follow. Firstly, you have to establish compassion. Here you see how the other person is suffering, and then you try and put yourself in their shoes and show that you care. Another way to develop compassion is to often experience other people's suffering, or by practicing compassion meditations, as these 2 things help remind you how common suffering is. And then the next aspect is to respect the other person's backgrounds and views, and finally, be honest, open, and try and find common ground. Let's move on to the third section of this book, Transforming Suffering. The Dalai Lama gives many different ways to deal with suffering. The first way is to accept suffering as a natural part of life, and something that we share with all other living creatures. Secondly, to confront problems which cause suffering and look for solutions. And thirdly, be aware of self-created suffering. We can often cause unnecessary suffering by overreacting or taking things too personally. And fourthly, that all things change, and one must be aware of this and not try to resist it, because if you resist change, this creates suffering. The fifth way is to find meaning in suffering. This can help make the suffering feel less overwhelming. And one way to do this is as a religious or spiritual practice. And then the sixth way is specifically relating to dealing with physical pain. Here you have to understand that pain is essential to life, as it prevents injuries and is an important learning tool. And knowing pain's purpose can help you manage it. And finally, he talks about how Buddhism sees suffering. In Buddhism, there are 3 root causes of suffering: ignorance, craving, and hatred. And now for the last section of this book, overcoming obstacles. Here the Dalai Lama is talking specifically about negative emotions and behaviors, and the process of change. This is a 3-step plan. The first step involves education and learning. Here you have to see why you want to change, and what are the positives and negatives of making this change. And then the second step is determination and enthusiasm. Here you remind yourself of why you wanted to change, you use a long-term view to help create perspective, and you remind yourself of your own impermanence. These 3 things will help motivate you and create a sense of urgency to create the change. And then the third step is action. Here you use habituation to your advantage. Consistent effort over time will develop habits. Next, the Dalai Lama talks about dealing with specific negative emotions. In Buddhism, one of the main ways to combat negative emotions is with their corresponding positive emotions. So in dealing with anger and hatred, he says you should cultivate patience and tolerance. This can be difficult at first, but when anger arises, try and take a time out and then analyze the situation. This is not an easy process, and at times you may not be able to stop yourself, but it will happen eventually. Secondly, dealing with anxiety and building self-esteem. The corresponding positive emotion here is sincere motivation. But the Dalai Lama also gives a simple approach to fear and worry. The approach involves asking this question: can the problem be solved? If it is such that it can be remedied, then there's no need to worry about it. Alternatively, if there's no possible solution, then there's no point in being worried about it anyway because you can't do anything. Even after knowing this concept, you might still find yourself worrying. Just keep reminding yourself of this question. Thanks for watching, and if you preferred the shorter summary, let me know in the comments below, and I look forward to seeing you in future videos.